All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our stream. I am Betty Rhoades. I'm the Executive Director of HillVets. I am really excited to be here today with two of our HillVets 100 of 2019 honorees, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan and Congressman Jack Bergman. We're really excited to get to have a little conversation with them today. First, I want to thank the folks who are helping us make the 100 in 100 possible, JP Morgan Chase, along with Horizon Therapeutics and With Honor Action. We're really excited to present this program as part of our 100 in 100 virtual series. So thank you both for joining us today. I first want to introduce Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan. She is an Air Force veteran, engineer, entrepreneur, educator, who is continuing a long career of service as the first woman to ever represent Pennsylvania's 6th District in Congress. She is the daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. She grew up in a military family. Her parents actually met while her father and grandfather were flying P-3s in the same Navy squadron. And she earned her engineering degree from Stanford with an ROTC scholarship that launched her career in the U.S. Air Force and the Air Force Reserves. And then she later earned her MS in Technology and Policy from MIT. Fun fact about Congresswoman Houlahan as well, she founded the Service Women and Women Veterans Caucus. So welcome to Congresswoman Houlahan. And we are also joined by Congressman Jack Bergman. Congressman Bergman he has successfully owned and operated small businesses, enjoyed a 22-year career as a commercial airline pilot. He represents the 1st District of Michigan, and those boundaries contain the entire Upper Peninsula and then all of the northern Lower Peninsula. And make sure I get that one right. And the family roots for the Bergmans stretch back in that area to the late 1800s, where they worked as iron miners. He served his country in uniform for 40 years, meaning that he spent his time all over the world and all over the United States. And he is the highest ranking combat veteran to have ever served in the U.S. House. So welcome to you, Congressman, as well. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So let's get started chatting briefly about your military careers. So we'll start with you, Congresswoman. You came from a military family, so it was around in your early life, but did you ever have any doubt that you would follow in those footsteps, or was it a sure thing from the start?
It was a sure thing from the start. As you mentioned, I'm 3rd generation military, and my grandfather and my dad served more than 30 years each, as you mentioned, in P-3s primarily. And my brother served in the Army. I have cousins who are Navy, and I think it's been sort of part of our heritage that service is really important. Service to country is really, really important. And for me, I joined the Air Force because I was interested, actually, interestingly enough, in flying. And the Air Force still, to this day, I believe, is probably a better opportunity for women to be pilots. And instead, ironically, I met my husband very, very early on and decided that it was really important to have both of us have great, strong careers. And rather than being the 3rd generation pilot, I decided to head into engineering. And the rest is history. I've been married for 31 years now.
Quite a feat. Quite a feat. Congressman, what about you? Was the military something that you knew from the get-go that you were going down that road?
Well, I was a typical 18-year-old in a small town in Minnesota, being raised by Depression-era parents. And my dad, my uncle, a couple others were in World War II. So I grew up going to Memorial Day ceremonies, attending VFW events. So I guess the idea of service was in my blood, whether it be, in the small town or in uniform. And little known, but I don't know, maybe it's a fun fact. My first year of college was at the Coast Guard Academy. And I went there for a year and found that it was a great place. But really, I didn't have a passion at the time for the Coast Guard mission. Left there after a year, and I was then cemented the fact that I knew I was going to go in the military. The question is which service, and I ran into a pretty smooth-talking Marine recruiter not long after.
That's funny how there are some of those scattered throughout the country, yeah. For from your military service, do you think that you, and this question is for both of you, so whoever wants to jump in, do you feel like that military service set you up well for public office? You know, how did that transition? How do you go from serving your country in one way in the military to serving in public office?
Well,
Which of you would like? Which one of us would you like to go first?
you're first, Chrissy.
Okay. For me, it's a natural extension. You know, for me, I also spent some of my the rest of my career, because I just was in for a short amount of time in the early 90s and late 80s. For me, this is a continuation of service. I also served through Teach for America as a chemistry teacher, and I think that it's a really important place to be right now, to have a veteran background, to have a service background, to try to bring people together in a really divided time in our country, and to try to put, as I spoke earlier, kind of country above party and country above self. And so this is a natural continuation of that. And so I'm grateful to be here now.
Being an elected role was never, it just happened literally about 6 years after retirement for me. But my service at the senior 3-star level in the General Officer Corps enabled me many times to give testimony before congressional committees and subcommittees. So I knew a little bit how it worked. But the idea of serving in another way, serving the public, serving the constituents, and I guess my passion, I'm sure, just like Christy and all the other folks in the Four Country Caucus, serving all the veterans and their families who have given so much. My background, even though not in elected office and not as a legislator, my background is a leader and understanding budgeting and putting money where it needed to be. It was kind of a natural fit. And picking it at this point in my life, I had a lot of experience, so I could build relationships with other colleagues. Democrat, Republican makes no difference to me, because we all have to work together to get something done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you both mentioned things that are a great segue into the Four Country Caucus. So for folks in our audience who may not be aware, what is the Four Country Caucus, and why is it important? Why are you both members of that caucus? Congressman, let's start with you this time.
Well, number one, you basically have to have been a member of the military. So you understand the organization of the military, regardless of the service. And when you can find colleagues, common background, it allows you then, I believe, to get together more quickly and be more productive because of the commonality of the background. And let's face it, we believe to the core of our being, each and every one of us, is that service is something that as many young men and women or boys and girls leading to becoming, young men and women that can get involved in, especially early in their lives, is going to make them happier, number one, and probably more productive and just be better citizens. So it's an opportunity for us to set the example.
Great. Oops. Uh-oh. Congresswoman, you're muted.
That caucuses in Congress are not dissimilar to clubs in high school or in college. They're indicators of your propensity to be with people, right? And what's different about the Four Country Caucus from all the other caucuses that I'm aware of is that this is one that it's not about ideology, it's not about a single issue, but rather it's about something that we have in common, in that we've all worn the uniform and we've all served before in that capacity. And so, as Jack mentioned, I think it kind of has us coming in with a set of values, a set of shared ideas about how, we should be able to work together. And it also has as part of its commitment something that's also unique in Congress, which ought not to be, which is that we promise and pledge to one another that we will treat one another with civility and decency, and that we will model that civility and decency across the Congress and within our communities. And that is unfortunately not something that's very common within the body, and something that I hope that we are able to model for other people and to have emulated.
I have to believe, though, while civility and decency is the order for the Four Country Caucus, you still get some jabs at those services
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
all the time.
Nonsense across service rivalries and all kinds of jokes about who arrives on time and who arrives late and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of rivalry still.
You can always count on that when you get folks from the military together, a constant in this ever-changing world. I love it. So one of the reasons we asked to speak with you is because you are part of our HillVets 100 of 2019. And congratulations, first of all, for being a part of that list. It's a very impressive list. And of course, we're sorry we haven't been able to celebrate you appropriately in person. We hope to do that at some point soon. But the primary reason that the two of you were nominated and selected together was because of your work on the Improve Wellbeing for Veterans Act. So that stands for this is my favorite part of legislation, is finding ways to get these acronyms in. So the incorporating measurements and providing resources for outreach to veterans everywhere. It's a great acronym. Well done. How did it come about? What was the genesis for this piece of legislation? Congressman, why don't you start?
Okay. We know everybody accepts the fact that there's 20 veterans a day who take their own lives. As sad as that is, even more disappointing, if you will, is that 14 of those 20 are outside the VA system. So we could pour money into the Veterans Administration all day long and never reach the target market. So the Improve Act was designed to allow the VA to use some existing grant money to try some different ways of outreach to those vulnerable veterans who are outside the VA system. And just another way to look at, how to get it done, not in a standard bureaucratic way. So that was the genesis, more outreach to veterans outside the system. And then hopefully through the connection with these new ways to do it, get them into the system, get them help, and move it forward to allow them to live a productive life.
Anything to add, Congresswoman?
Yeah, I think that the important emphasis here is that what we were doing wasn't completely working. We were seeing an increased number of veterans who were taking their lives by suicide. And so we needed to be innovative and thoughtful about how we could address this issue. And Jack is right that this is an opportunity to try to find people where they are. And I'll give you an example. My brother served, as I mentioned, in the Army. He lives in Iowa and he's hours away from the nearest VA. And so if he were to need something, reach out to somebody, he would most likely not be able to access the VA. And so this is an opportunity for him to be able to be helped if he were, as an example, of needing that. Similarly, women in particular are not as likely to access VA facilities and support for lots and lots of different reasons that we can address at a different time. But again, we need to find people where they are. We need to make sure that women who are veterans are twice as likely to take their lives by suicide as women who are not. We need to find those people where they are and help them where they are and guide them into the VA system.
Yeah, and if I can make a capstone statement on that, we had over 250 co-sponsors, split right down the middle, Democrat and Republicans, but we ran into some institutional resistance that we all of us, Democrats and Republicans who were co-sponsoring it, we know that we could have done better, quicker to get that bill across the line. But thankfully, we were able to get the Senate to take it up and bring it back in a slightly modified form. But we got it done because we don't quit on your buddies. You just don't.
Right. Well, you hit on a great point that I wanted to ask about, and that is the importance of bipartisan support for a piece of legislation like this. Can you talk to our audience about how critical that is, and how you went about garnering all of that support that is really impressive? Congresswoman, yeah.
I think it's very important that we find ways to work bipartisanly, and not just on this issue. Veterans issues tend to be those kinds of places where we can find one another, but on frankly every issue. I think that we have so much more in common than we do not in common. And I am constantly trying to, through the organization, for country, through other organizations, there's another group called Problem Solvers that I'm part of, to try to find people to be able to work across the aisle. Because I think that it's really important to not only do that because I think it ends up with better legislation, but I think we need to, again, model for the American people that there is a way to get things done that isn't partisan, and that is, in fact, working for the people. And so I think that it's a really important way to think about legislation? Can you find somebody to co-sponsor it with you from the other side of the aisle? Can you bring people along from both sides of the aisle to generate some sort of momentum? And although it was with some hiccups, I'm very grateful to Chairman Takano and to a bunch of other folks on the Senate side for having seen the validity of this and being able to move it forward with us.
Congressman, your thoughts on the bipartisan support of this legislation?
It takes two people to have a conversation. At least one of them has to be listening. And the point I found, when I was born, my ears were so big, my parents didn't know that I'd walk or fly. I flew. But when you use your ears and you listen, because all 435 of us in the House are trying to do the best for our district, are trying to do the best for our veterans. And if you just take the time, if you've never met someone before, whether you're on your side of the aisle or the other, listen, find out what's going on, and then try to apply your words, if you will, on the issue here is that the outreach to veterans in your community who may be at risk, most people will perk up and say, what can I do? How much do I have to do to get involved? And simply just sign here, be a co-sponsor, because Rep. Houlahan and I are carrying the load for you all to do that.
I love that it takes two people to have a conversation, and at least one of them has to be listening. That's great. I also like an old boss of mine who was a Navy guy always said, you get two ears and one mouth, and there's a reason for that proportion. So all excellent advice. So Improve was, if I'm correct, was incorporated into the John Scott Hannon Act that became law in the latter part of last year. So congratulations. That was a huge bill to get across the finish line. So as far as the Improve pieces that you all worked so hard on, what do you think happens now? What would you like to see happening now?
Okay, I'll go for my turn to go first.
Sure.
We'll go back and forth. I'll keep the tally. Okay. Anyway, well, I'm the ranking member on the subcommittee on health for Veterans Affairs. So our role now as legislators and Veterans Affairs Committee members is to do the oversight piece and understand how the VA is doing as far as implementing it, and hold people to task at all levels so that we get the maximum effort and the output here on the front end, and then get the data to see where we've succeeded and share the stories across the country of where different groups have done it, in various ways and have had success. So we can share those success stories with all of the groups who are trying to do the right thing. But it's role as Congress now and role as Veterans Affairs is to just ensure that the Veterans Administration gets the ball rolling, and we have to make sure that things happen.
And what I would say is I don't have the privilege of serving on the Veterans Affairs Committee, but I do serve on the Armed Services Committee. And one of the things that I've been struck by in the very limited time that I've been in Congress is how siloed those two concepts are. And I think it's really important that we be data-driven, as Jack has mentioned, and that we find what's working and share anecdotes and stories. But I think it's also important to figure out how to smooth that out. The career trajectory of a person from recruitment to active duty to reserve to retirement to veteran status, it's one person that's doing all of those kinds of things. And we need to find them all the way up and down that chain. And that's one of the reasons why I've been really aggressive in my advocacy for women who serve in that entire, arc of their lives. And so I would ask that we also look backwards, or I guess forwards, in the sense with when people are actually active duty as well, where they also may have issues with mental health and ideations of suicide as well.
And if I could just put a capstone on that, I serve on both Armed Services and Veterans Affairs. And for the longest time, still today, when you leave DOD service, you kind of drop into an abyss. Mm-hmm. And then you got to claw your way into the veteran system. So you got two stovepipe bureaucracies that historically knew they should be working together, but were not incentivized or pushed in that direction. So I believe our role here is to build those bridges that when a person leaves DOD service in whatever status, they take all their records, they take their electronic health record, and it's a seamless transition. We're way overdue, but technology right now will enable us to do it. We just have to do it.
Yeah, I think VA and DoD being such huge entities could probably take some lessons from your bipartisan work.
Yeah, and if I could add something to that, when with the women's lens again, what we learned in the Air Force with a pilot program is that with 4 hours of training, forget about technology, with 4 hours of training women as they transitioned out, as they separated, that the VA was for them and that they were welcome and what services were available. We saw increased adaptation. People actually used the VA, the women actually used the VA, and decreased suicide ideology. So they're just, those kinds of low-tech solutions are also there too, but I completely agree that we're at a really important pivot moment where we really can link it all together so it isn't siloed and we don't drop into the abyss.
Yeah. Did you take any other larger lessons from the process of moving this piece of legislation that you're going to take with you into the 117th?
Well, I think we were both freshmen, when this was all going down. And even though, we're freshmen, we're not rookies completely. So I think we did kind of learn a little bit about the process of managing this body and the folks who are in it. And so those are some of the lessons that I hope to take forward, is a lesson that it can work out. It may work out not necessarily how you thought it might work out, but it's worth the squeeze.
Yeah, and I would say it's a capstone statement. There's always more than one way to skin a cat. One of the ways we started with maybe didn't work, second or third way. But when you can create an environment where everybody, I mean everybody, feels as though they've got positive skin in the game, now you've got a recipe for results.
Great. Well, before we wrap up, I want to just offer you an opportunity to give some closing thoughts. And I might pose it this way. So HillVets focuses on getting more veterans, military family members into congressional staff. There are other organizations that work on getting more veterans to run for public office. What advice do you have for either of those groups for folks who want to get involved in the policy process, either as staff or as elected officials? Congresswoman?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. See, we all take turns. Number one, do your homework. Just like you would in any project, see what's out there, and the ability now through the internet to actually find out what type of availabilities there are. And then once you've done a little bit of research, reach out, especially veterans. You could start as simple as reach out through some of the VSOs here to see who their contacts are on the Hill or in the greater DC area. But a first step, depending on where you live, may be to look at your local, no matter what state you're in, what are your local opportunities with maybe your state legislatures or your offices of your reps in your home district. We're always looking for good people to come in and do a little internship and do this, do that, to lead, to crawl, walk, run, and get their feet wet a little bit and see what it's really like. Maybe answer a few phone calls at a district office when it's an interesting day. So anyway, but that's do your homework and then just start asking questions. And it's amazing how many people want to share. We want to bring good people in to follow us and populate the staffs, let them learn. And it's kind of the reason that lieutenants and captains don't command squadrons and battalions. They're good, motivated youngsters, but they don't have the experience of a lieutenant colonel. And how do you get a good lieutenant colonel unless you start them as a young green lieutenant and just give them the leadership and give them the experience that's going to build their confidence and build their capability.
Great.
So I guess what I would say as I was thinking and listening, using my ears, I would say I was thinking about a lot of the advice my dad gave me, and Navy captain guy, and he would always say half of life is showing up. So you got to first show up. The other thing he'd say, it still does, is don't negotiate with yourself. Don't completely convince yourself that you're not qualified or you're not eligible or you can't do it or, any of those kinds of things. And the last thing that I would say is he always would say, you can do that, whatever it was, whatever really hard task it was, standing on your head. And this is hard. Like what I like about this job and this environment is that this is a place not dissimilar from the military where people with really hard work ethics live. And if you've got one of those hard work ethics and a purpose and you're a patriot, and I believe that all of us who are here are all of those things, then you can do this standing on your head. But it's a really, really hard and challenging job, and go for it, and don't negotiate with yourself.
Great advice. Thank you both so much. And once again, congratulations on being a part of the HillVets 100. We hope we get to celebrate with you in person soon. And thank you again for joining us tonight to talk a little bit about some of the great things that you were able to accomplish last Congress. We wish you all the best health, safety, and success in the 117th. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.